But remember, you might want to mute so you don't have the echo.
On mine? Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are now live streaming with the president of RCAF USA, Brett Kinsey, and the vice president of RCAF USA, Eric Nelson. And I will attempt to moderate tonight, and we're going to talk about the challenges and opportunities we have right now with a delayed farm bill. The farm bill that was supposed to have been completed by 2023 has now been extended into 2024. Along with the farm bill extension, there's been an extension of the appropriations bill for agriculture that is now due January 19th. And it has implications for the farm bill. And in particular, it has implications for one of the most important rulemakings that we have been long awaiting for. And that's the rulemaking by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to implement the key provisions within the Packers and Stockyards Act dealing with conduct by the packers that is unfair, deceptive, unjustly discriminatory, or that results in undue preferences or advantages. That's the rulemaking we're waiting for from USDA. But tonight we're going to talk primarily about the farm bill and the opportunities that we have. And I'm going to just turn it right over to Brett to begin with, and we'll just go with the conversation.
All right. Thanks, Bill. I guess we wanted to have this Facebook Live just to kind of update our members and anybody else that happens in. I've had pretty much overwhelming call volume. I think Eric's had call volume increase too with the collapse of these futures markets. A lot of blame being placed on the futures, but the futures has always been a pretty dangerous place to dwell if you don't know what you're doing. And as we've seen, sometimes when you do know what you're doing, it can be pretty unpredictable and pretty tough to bet your place on. And we'll get to that. But I guess I just kind of wanted to start with an overview, just thinking about going into this farm bill. We've got an extension. Noticeably, if you read the news, the powers that be, what Eric and I jokingly call the status quo, your big ag organizations, you're at the behest of the big ag corporations, really wanted this farm bill passed. They wanted it passed with what they considered to be a do no harm mentality, which means fix nothing. And they almost got it done. But it's interesting that the fracturing in Congress, the process that was gone through to elect a Speaker of the House, and then the recent removal of the Speaker of the House, the deals that were made in that, having to go line item to approve budgets, we're starting to see, and fracture is the word that comes to mind, but I really think that it's healthier than a fracture. You know, we're told that we need to unify, we need to go along, we need to get along. But I think that we're seeing Congress maybe has done that too much in the past, and they're starting to think again. They're starting to think about serving their constituents and the things that they promised. So I guess I think that we really need to ram food security home going into this run downhill until Farm Bill is finally done. In September is the goal. I've heard that maybe it's going to be set in stone as early as the first quarter of 24. There's all kinds of stories going on, but we have to keep in mind that the United States is now a net food importer. And how does that make us feel? Personally, I'm really tired of the flippant demeanor of our congressmen when we come to them telling them that we have some serious issues in this industry. You know, I'm at a basketball game and I just scribbled a few things down. I mean, front page of last week's Tri-State Livestock News, imports up, exports down. Paraguay beef, smallest cow herd since the 60s, continued contraction. And this is despite all this government money flowing in to save us. The war on beef, sustainability guidelines, mandatory ID. But again, I'll come back to where I started. The good news is that for every issue that we're fighting in the cattle industry, we're starting to see the average American begin to take the destruction of this country seriously and take it upon themselves and push back on what they see happening. And so I think that I always say we live in exciting times, and we do. It's going to be excitingly good or excitingly bad, but as fast as things move now, and use the Chicago Mercantile Exchange as an example of how fast things can move now. I just think that we have to redouble our efforts here for the next few months going forward, and we've got to get through to these congressmen, and we've got to tell them that food security hangs in the balance, because people are deflated. And adding to that deflation is now you start to see on social media the people saying, well, you should have been hedged. Well, guys, it's not that simple. I mean, when things get this in disarray, it's hard to buy cattle, because unfortunately, when things get this erratic, we need risk management worse than ever. And that's what the CME was supposedly designed to create. So that's a whole bunch in a short amount of time. But I guess that's just kind of what I want to put forward to you is, honestly, it is time to take it personally, what is going on in this country. And I see a lot of people that maybe are too proud to fight for their industry, but they will get their hair up on the back of their neck about their country. And guys, it's intertwined. As goes this industry, so goes the nation. So that's what I wanted to start with.
Hey, well, thank you. And Eric, from Iowa, you're feeding cattle. You're watching the cattle futures market. You've been affected by it for the past couple months. Where would you go from here?
Well, you know, and I appreciate a lot of the comments that Brett made. You know, it's interesting just talking to so many people, watching what's being said on cattle. Well, it used to be called Cattle Twitter. It's Cattle X now. A pundit that's pretty well read today was making the comments after this market broke again that, well, we still have too many cows. And the only way that you can make that comment is if you really believe that the market is working. And I think that as sad as the market action has been the last almost 2 months, it's given us a pretty clear view on a clean window that this market is not working. It is not. And I think we've got to be careful to blame the futures market. And I simply look at the goings on in the corn and soybean futures. And because as a farmer feeder, I'm involved with that directly as well. And there's not the trouble in that part of the futures market that there is in the cattle, but there are a handful of cash markets open from 8:30 to 1:30, 5 days a week in the grain markets. It's very dynamic. And if we think that we're going to have a workable futures market without a workable cash slaughter cattle market, that's not going to happen. And so we're going to have to continue to push to find solutions for making this cattle market actually work. And the clear evidence that it's not is last week in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, the average steer price was higher than what steers brought in Iowa, Minnesota. The difference in quality between what's on average fed in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, which is often where a lot of these New Mexico or Mexican feeder cattle imports are flowing into. It's egregious what's going on. So again, the market it's not operating in a competitive fashion. It is not. And you know, the evidence is never been clearer. And I'm getting phone calls from guys that are darn mad. And, you know, and so, yes. And to dovetail back into the farm bill, you know, there's some good tidbits that have happened around that farm bill. One, that USDA has announced that, you know, as an agency, they're going to have to buy born, raised, and slaughtered in the U.S. beef. And a lot of the reasoning for opposing MCOOL is now it's gone. And so we've got to lean hard into that to lead our way hopefully back out of this abyss. But we've got to take strong action. And everybody that I've talked to that has reached out to me in the last couple of weeks, they're ready for that. And as what Brett was, referring to, and it isn't, their reawakening hasn't been necessarily just because of what's going on in the cattle industry, because there's been a lot of questionable things going on throughout the country.
Well, excellent points. And you brought up some key features of the Farm Bill that we've been working on for a long, long time. They were included in our 5-year plan that we began in 2021. They were included in our Farm Bill platform. And the one that you just mentioned, the Agricultural Marketing Service of the USDA, has now announced that it will only purchase meat from animals that are born, raised, and slaughtered in the United States for the procurement that it undertakes with taxpayer dollars. And that only makes sense. And so there's an issue that RCAF has been fighting for a long time. And it is a win, a huge win, because that action is going to help to increase demand for animals that are exclusively born and raised here in the United States. And Eric, you also brought up the cash market disparity between what happens in the grain markets versus what happens in the cattle market in terms of the cash market. And what we've seen was an intense scrutiny of the shrinking cash market beginning in 2015, when it then fell to an all-time low. And then it fell to the lowest level in history in 2019. And now in recent months, we see that it's even lower yet. Comment some more on the impact that that's having. And if that price is distorted, one would expect the futures market to be distorted as well, as indicated, that they're tied together, and the futures market is actually supposed to be informed by the cash market, not the other way around, as we're seeing today with the tail wagging the dog.
Correct. And there's some structural, there are some structural changes that have happened to the CME cattle contracts. And again, they go back to actually early July 2015, when pit trading ended, and basically a curtain went up that there used to be windows into who was making the trade, who was moving the market. And when those things were done in open exchange in the pit, you could talk to seat owners there at the Merc and find out a lot of good information. That went away. And at the same time as the packers have increased their use of AMAs and advanced marketing agreements, laying in inventory well in advance of when the cattle are slaughtered, they no longer enter the long side of the market as maybe they once did. And so the cattle market, the cattle CME exchange is thinly traded on the long side compared to what it once was. And all of us that are trying to use that as a marketing tool to put off risk, we need the long players. And I think that the market action in the last 6 weeks really points out how thinly traded it is. It still can be large volume, but the large volume of trades is in the hands of very few. But we're frankly in the blind versus what we were prior to July of 2015. And it was wonky. The second half of 2015, the futures market, I believe it's behaving similarly just right now.
Yep. And Brett, you mentioned how the federal government has become out of touch with the American people and with the industries that it represents. And so we've got the U.S. Department of Agriculture just made the announcement that it has finalized its rule to begin allowing Paraguayan beef, both fresh and frozen beef, into the United States. And of course, Paraguay is a country where foot and mouth disease continues to be a problem, has been a problem. And we haven't even done an on-site visit in that country for 9 years. And yet, in its infinite wisdom, the USDA has decided to open the borders. So isn't that an example of what you were talking about in terms of being out of touch with the citizenry of this country?
Well, I mean, it really is. There's 100,000 employees at USDA, and most of them are real good people. Everyone that I interact with here on a personal level in South Dakota, they're good, well-meaning people, but the problem's coming from above. Interestingly, and this isn't RCAF, this is just my research. I haven't really defined anything. I've stumbled onto some information that we have a big initiative going with Paraguay now to lead them towards sustainable agriculture. And I think it's probably a diplomatic effort to head off China, who is very aggressive in South America, very aggressive in Brazil. Washington, D.C. is just an interconnected mess. And I mean, if I'd like to hear your guys' comments in terms of trade with Paraguay. There's a quote on Twitter that said, trade must be science-based. It can never be political. And I would challenge you that if that is the truth, then every sovereign nation in the world is done. If that's the truth, if that's going to be the standard of trade going forward, then sovereignty is over, because it's all about science and least cost producer. And that's really the end, the flag we just saluted here before the basketball game began, isn't it? Or is that too simplistic?
Well, it certainly threatens our food security. A nation, when exercising its sovereignty, has the authority and right to maintain domestic industries that are critical to the food security of the nation, or to the security of the nation. And obviously, food production is among those industries that need special attention and should not be thrown to the wind in the comment that was made. And what we recognize here of late is that there are industries in the United States that must be preserved in order for us to maintain our nation's security, including our food security. And the beef industry, the cattle industry, the sheep industry, all of those are important protein sources for American citizens. And it's very, very dangerous when you become to rely upon foreign sources for vital food needs, vital foodstuffs, as this industry is producing. So I agree along those lines that this is a threat to the food security of this country, and trade should not be based just on those types of issues that just ignore completely the food security and national interests of a sovereign nation.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Bill. I think it's a simplistic view of the world, that everyone is always going to be on the same page. And as we can see, as dust-ups develop around the globe today, that things are not that simple. Although the statement that all trade is good is partly right. It's always good for somebody, but it doesn't mean that it's good for all parties. And as we can see at the advanced levels of imports as to lamb and how that affects the sheep industry, the fact that the domestic consumption of lamb is over 75% of it's imported today. I mean that, and a lot of people are seeing that, and they understand that is not, it's not smart policy. And a lot of people are not aware that right around 20% of the beef consumed in this country is imported. Not to mention the concentration of the ownership of a lot of our processing facilities in foreign hands, which at the time of slaughter, those animals are all owned by those foreign corporations. So over probably around half of the beef that's processed in this country is at one point in that process is wholly owned by those foreign corporations, and that hasn't fallen on deaf ears, and those topics have spurred a lot of phone calls and emails to me over the as these markets have started to wane. People are questioning, and And I think that they're understanding more than ever that there are terrible systemic problems.
And obviously, we see that we do have some champions in Congress, and the Paraguayan beef is a good issue. We just had a bill introduced by a bipartisan bill by Senator Mike Rounds from South Dakota and Senator John Tester from Montana to suspend the importation of Paraguayan beef until such time as a working group could be formed to evaluate the true risks associated with importing that product from that country, and risks not just to the livestock industry, but to the United States food safety. So very important piece of legislation. Unfortunately, USDA's rule is intended to go into effect on December 14th. So Congress has a very short window, a narrow window, in order to prevent the United States from embarking upon this risky adventure as represented by that action. But we also have other issues that we've got champions in Congress on as the Farm Bill develops. And we have bills that have been introduced in Congress that are ready to be included into the Farm Bill. And they include some flagship issues for our CAP, of course, and that's mandatory country of origin labeling and reforming the beef checkoff program, a program that has not been benefiting the actual producers who've been paying. So Brett, do you want to touch on those initiatives that are underway?
Well, I mean, as we go through our Farm Bill initiatives, I think it's important that maybe one of the best ways to reform the CME is to make this industry, this cattle industry, domestically an industry worth betting on again, long term, right? You can't tell me that these speculators, the funds, whoever, aren't watching the news to see what we're getting done to defend ourselves or to defend our industry against those of the, I mean, we want to sell cattle high, they want to buy them cheap globally, right? And so that's where MCOOL comes in. I mean, this imports up, exports down. That is a never-ending self-fulfilling prophecy if we're not able to differentiate. Because once your cow herd begins to diminish, you can never get back up again when they bring this beef in from overseas that you never get to compete against. We'll end up like the sheep, right? Lose 60% of their producers and 60% of the sheep numbers in the United States in what, Bill, the last few decades?
Yes.
26, 24% of, as lamb consumption increases, 24% of American lamb is domestically raised. What has that done to rural America? You know, and that's why I guess I hate hammering the problems all the time. And I think it needs to be said, my pens are full. I am what you would call fully invested. My cows are bred. We're going to have cows this March. I'm in it to win it, right? Skin in the game. So we don't want to be too dark about this, but if you don't face your problems, they're not going to go away on their own. So MCOOL, I think, is just, it's absolutely so common sense. It's ludicrous. We've debunked this World Trade Organization issue that at this point is nothing but a political excuse. And I would love to hear anybody try to debunk that, because it's just a fact. I mean, we're going to have to decide, does domestic food security matter or not? And I think it does. As far as the OFF Act goes, we hear over and over again that the animal rights activists want to kill the checkoff. And, you know, I gained some unique perspective on that too. I say that our issues in this industry mirror larger national issues. Well, what's the greatest way to throw somebody off in national politics? It's to call them a racist, right? Well, how about in our industry? What's the dirtiest word you can call somebody in our industry? It's an animal rights activist. Well, I'm here to tell you, it's not only animal, if there are animal rights activists that support the OFF Act, I'm not an animal, I'm all for animal rights, don't get me wrong. They're shadow banning you, they're shaming you, they're trying to shut you down, because I hear from a lot of people that the powers that be that benefit from the checkoff as it stands now are nervous. Nothing has had them more nervous in decades than losing the checkoff dollars that put the cowboy hat on the beef industry's head. Because if they can't lobby with that, they can't push things like mandatory RFID with our money. They can't push for mandatory BQA certification. All these certifications that are coming down the pipe, they've all been enabled with checkoff money. So.
Okay. So Eric, in terms of those two initiatives that are already introduced in Congress, and that again is mandatory country of origin labeling, and the OFF Act, the Opportunities for Fairness in Farming Act, that would reform the checkoffs. The principal reform there, of course, is to prohibit any group that actively lobbies in agriculture from being the recipient of the producer's beef dollars. And in other words, the dollars would have to flow directly to an entity that can provide the promotion or research for the respective commodity group, and would not have to be first funneled through a middleman, as we currently see the programs today. But what is missing in that is to address the issues that you raised, and that is these alternative marketing arrangements that are committing cattle to the packers for over the long term, but without providing benefits to the price discovery process. And so we do not have legislation introduced that will directly address that issue. So what's your take on what we need to do between now and let me restate that. What do we need to begin doing right now in order to include that third leg into this farm bill?
Well, there was legislation that was proposed a couple of years ago to try to come up with some arbitrary number to mandate a certain percent of trades, and that got all chewed up in worrying about the regions that we have and all of that. And so if you don't limit these arrangements somehow, and for years my senator here tried to get a ban on unpriced agreements, on these agreements that don't have a fixed base price. And so that that was one of the very first ones when this problem was really recognized back in the late 90s. Neil Harrell, economist from Iowa State, was watching the hog industry closely and was convinced that as the hog industry went, that what was learned there was going to be carried over into the cattle industry, and it has been. And so but ultimately, if you go back 100 years, what ended up working was pressure that was brought on in 1921, it was 5 packers that had 35% concentration level, and government imposed on them to get together and hold themselves accountable, and they did for a long time. It was called the consent decree. So but I think that it's obvious with the price action that we've had now of the last getting close to 2 months that that some new proposals need to be pushed out, because I believe in a lot of the conversations I've been involved with, the stomach for what's happening again, it's not there, and people are fully realizing, after 2015 and stabilization after 2015, many thought, oh yeah, everything's going to be fine again. And our calf was, we're like the Marines, the few, the proud. We continued to be diligent in warning folks that we're still highly susceptible because that invisible arm of competition was no longer there. And I think there are a lot of people that fully get it now. So I think we have to be bold.
Great. So we had a question from Ron, and he asked if it's possible that we could file an injunction to stop the imports by December 14th. And the answer is we're exploring every potential avenue to prevent those high-risk imports from entering the United States. And the first step in that process is the legislation that was recently filed. We're going to see how quickly that legislation can move its way through both the House and the Senate. But that isn't our last not all our eggs in that are in that basket alone. So we don't know if an injunction is possible yet, but we are exploring such avenues. So Brett, we've gone a half an hour. Do you want to have some final remarks?
Well, we wanted to keep these short, and I hope we can do some more, maybe dive a little deeper into the issues, because I think that we need to reframe them. We've been at this a long time, but I think that it shows that we're on the right track, that our issues never go out of style, so to speak, right? When you have a principled outlook and a principled goal, like enforcement of the law, justice is blind, checks and balances. I think that that's kind of what I see America hungry for again. I guess I would just end with something I came across here: Harvested Cattle Slaughtered Markets, C. Robert Taylor. If you want to read something that will dive you in to what's really going on and debunk a lot of the beef industry talking points in terms of quality, and underscore the importance of competitive marketing, value discovery, it's a good one. But there's one paragraph in here in the big picture: who controls the food system? Who do the people want to control the food system? Will entry as a producer be by invitation only? Will exit from production be due to bad business practices of an individual, or triggered by predatory activities of dominant corporations? Is the system fair? These are critical questions. And I think that as every day goes on, that paragraph becomes more and more applicable to what we're seeing going on with increased globalization, the threat of global standards coming down upon us, invited in from within. And we don't have time to go over that now, but it's a tremendous study, tremendous resource. So with that, I thank you for tuning in.
Yep. So Eric, any final remarks?
Now, well, other than we have some clarity. I mean, this is not good news, but in the very recent future, some pretty influential cattlemen in the country were trying to claim that it's the inheritance tax that's really the biggest problem that our industry has. And although I'm sure it's a problem for some, but it isn't related directly to the issues of the day. And the fact that we continue to have a shrinking cow herd, and as Brett said, the spine of our industry lacks the confidence right now to want to buy into the cattle market, and that's a problem. That is really a problem, and we have to get confidence back in order for us to have any chance of long-term profitability. And so it's right in front of us. We have to start to move and move pretty quickly.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, thank you everyone for joining tonight. As Brad indicated, we will be holding more of these, and we will not hold you for an hour to listen. And we are going to delve deeper in some of the more specific issues. And of course, there's a lot of issues affecting this industry. Chief among those is antitrust. And you'll recall that it was this organization that filed the lawsuit back in 2019 to address the antitrust issue and to address the lack of enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act. And since that time, we've seen many, in fact, every segment of government has come involved. We've got the Department of Justice and the USDA currently undertaking an investigation into the conduct of the meatpacking industry within our industry. And much of the legislation that we'll be talking about stems from the ultimate goal of restoring competition to this industry. And it will be competition that will be the savior. It's competition that is the lack of competition that has created the problem, and the solution has to be to restore competition. So we need to figure out how to get that done, and we have to do that within this vehicle that's available to us called the upcoming Farm Bill. So with that, thank you all. Good night.
Bill,
yes,
could I say one more thing?
please do.
I think that we need to illustrate that as we go forward, guys, we're optimistic. We're in it to win it. Eric's got grandkids. I have kids. Our pens are full. We're production agriculture all the way. And I just want to take a minute to thank all the members that make this possible, and to tell you that it's not all dark. We have fun. There's joy in this journey. So with that, Eric, I want you to tell me what unity means in Iowa.
Unity.
You're the one that told me, be reasonable, see it my way.
Be reasonable. So, no, but you bring up a great point, Brett. I gave a lecture, just yesterday to a bunch of college kids, and the first slide that I showed was the whole picture of my family, and I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for extended family. And I have it'd be fifth generation, sixth generation. Our family was helping us move cows tonight. We had to move cows from one stock field to another, and so that it's all about that, and we've got to prevail, and we're on the right track. And so and yeah, I couldn't agree more that we've got a lot of great members that have their hearts in this along with us, and we really appreciate the phone calls and the support from all of them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So good night, everyone, and we'll be back in touch with you soon. Good night, all.
Good night.